Hi everybody, this is Hero back with another Axis and Allies video. This is the 1942 edition available online. And in this video I'm going to walk through an entire game of the Battle for Britain Germany 2 strike at the UK. But I'm going to do something a little bit unique. I'm going to walk through the game having played to the best of my ability every single country's turn. So I'm going to do what I think is the best possible strategy I can do for each of the turns and show you why it is that I think Germany attacking the UK is a fairly strong strategy. And it's really hard to play against it. So we begin with typical attacks for Russia. And the goal here, guys, is to try to be as faithful to a legitimate strategy for every single country in the face of Germany's aggression on the UK. So you'll see some of the choices I make lean a bit more toward that, but I want to be clear that I was trying to defend it in the best way I knew how, given some of the stakes. So I attack into Sea Zone 5, for example, as the UK. I try to get rid of all the transports. Even knowing what the strategy is, will show you why it's really difficult to defend against it. So as we're getting started, and before we get into the Germans' turn, these are typical roles for Russia and Germany. I think it's really fairly reasonable for Russia, I believe. They had a pretty decent opening. I want to just talk very briefly about what is this Battle for Britain turn to Germany crush. Essentially, you buy 2 cruisers and 2 transports and you put them in Sea Zone 5. And the reason why you do that is that gives you 3 guaranteed transports. Not guaranteed, but 3 guaranteed transports to attack from Sea Zone 5 into England on turn 2, which can carry 3 tanks and 3 infantry, so 6 parties. Also, if your luck holds in this strategy, from Sea Zone 14, you can attack with another battleship and a transport filled with another tank and infantry to make it 4 and 4. And both of these are fairly accessible early options. Like, they're hard to fight it back against on turn 1 from UK to defend it. And none of the other teams or the other countries have really got into the picture before you're ready to go on this. So especially America is just far too slow. It's an extremely aggressive build. And when you see Russia, which has to go first, taking its typical route, this is kind of what you get. Clearing out of Karelia because it's too hard to defend due to the tunnel from Germany up to Karelia. Taking western Ukraine, applying pressure. Pretty good turn overall for Russia. Now, here's the play. Essentially, you're going to take out that cruiser in the Med. You're going to take out Sea Zone 7 with 2 of your subs and the rest of your fighters. Leave your cruiser in Sea Zone 5. Leave your transport in Sea Zone 5. Sea Zone 5 is a really incredible zone. And then you're just going to do your cleanup along the east coast. So you're going to take back Ukraine with the southern forces, or the forces in southern Europe. You're going to move everything, shuttling it up towards Karelia. You can do this in a couple of unique ways. You can use that transport to do an amphibious assault on Karelia that gets some of your infantry from Germany up into Karelia much quicker, especially good for the Finnish troops, or the Norwegian troops, which are on the top of our screen here. So those are good if in a few turns you can use that Sea Zone 5 if you still have the transport. You see I pulled them there to toss them up, but you can also take them from Germany. But the goal of this German build is to sort of get your forces lined up along the Baltic and in Karelia, because all of those regions, Karelia, Baltic, Germany, Norway, Finland, and even the west coast, so north of France there, like the Belgium region, these all connect to C-Zone 5, which means that any transports in that region, anything in the northern sphere there, can be grabbed and easily shuttled in both directions. And one of the things I was curious about with this build is, wait, what happens if UK gets somehow super stacked and it doesn't make any sense to attack it? They just dropped a whole bunch of dudes there or something. Or something goes horribly wrong, and then turn 2 it's not really that viable because you have to defend. Well, those transports can actually shuttle a lot of troops quickly, especially the infantry, up into Karelia, which is a strong target for moving east. You can get into Archangel, and once you start getting behind the Russian lines, it's really hard to defend the capital. Moscow goes down quickly because as soon as Archangel is out of the picture, you can really shuttle troops around. You can also go up and around, which to C-Zone 4 and do an amphibious assault. I've been really thinking a lot about the value of amphibious assaults and some of the tricks that are available, and you'll see it later in the game. But one of the more important ones, and I actually don't do it on the first turn, but you can, is you take that cruiser in C-Zone 5, and because you've done an amphibious assault into Karelia, you can also have that cruiser do an amphibious assault. You get one amphibious assault for each of the transports that you're sending at a target. So if you send 3 transports at the UK and you have 3 either cruisers or battleships, you'll get a shot from each of those. And one thing that's interesting is you can pull a troop off of the land into a transport and then send him into an adjacent territory that you could have just walked to. And it essentially initiates an amphibious assault, which means that you can have one bombardment go with it. So it's a way of really helping to get your naval troops into battles. And it's much more significant on the Pacific when you're dealing with Japanese and US troops. But for this build, it's particularly interesting. Now, a couple of the features as you're getting set up for turn 2, all of these movements are designed to give you free access. You can see I'm moving these subs, which I did not use in the battle in 7, to block 9 and 13, and I have 7 blocked off. That ensures that nothing from the UK or the US can interrupt that channel up through 13 and 8 without being disrupted. So the destroyer would have to go and attack that sub, but it's sort of dangerous because you can't reach England. Likewise, you're out of range and you can't plug up the sea with the destroyer from the UK. Everything else kind of gets routed to do turn 2 maneuvers, so we're moving a lot of our armor, as I said, up toward Karelia in that channel where it's accessible to be picked up in C-Zone 5. We are also going to put our transport in C-Zone 14 so that it can swing around, grabbing 2 troops from France to join in the fight. So these are all, again, just potential ideas that are waiting to happen. It's setting it up. But if something changes after the UK goes, you can pivot this and move those troops up right through Russia because you have those extra transports to shuttle a ton of infantry. Generally speaking, my turn 2 buy is armor or fighters in this build. And the reason for armor is because we want to pivot immediately after capturing the UK up into Karelia to apply pressure to Russia so that you have maximal effect of this blitz on the UK. The rest of our fighters are going to be doing the work of cleaning out the Atlantic as troops try to come across. So those subs are kind of protecting and they're going to dive in and try to attack in subsequent turns. And the fighters in the center of Germany are playing sort of bodyguard for the UK. Against the UK being retaken. One of the main difficulties for the Allies is having appropriate transports that can come in a significant enough wave to do damage either in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. On the Pacific side, it's all, of course, the work of the United States. And here, I'll just pause my thought and return to it later to talk to you about the choices being made. So this is kind of a double Dutch strategy, essentially. One of the things that the UK has to think about is, if I cannot use my fighter in Egypt in the Pacific theater because I'm trying to get rid of that battleship and that transport in 14, how am I going to address Japan with the rest? And that fighter in Egypt turns out to be extremely, extremely important. One move that you could do here if you're being very desperate, but it's hard to tell if you're overcommitting to send that destroyer in to try to kill the sub in 13, is how do you deal with what could be a potential threat, since it only looks like you have 3 transports in 5. It's kind of tricky what those are doing there. So this version, you're doing kind of a standard UK opener, as it were, while trying to clear out all of the naval that is in the Atlantic theater. So the double Dutch goes fairly well, I think, for the Brits here. And all of these are really tenuous fights. Like, these are not easy odds. You've got a battleship here, which happened to miss, which is really nice. And then we clean out that transport, so that saves a huge headache. And then we try to do the same in C-Zone 5 against 3 cruisers. So we get a hit, but we take 2 back. And this is one of the things that's really tough for making this commitment from the UK. Because if you do not get, as we just saw here, the cruiser, if you leave one left over, all 3 of those transports are now coming into the UK with three planes down, basically, 2 fighters especially. We're looking to reinforce Russia a little bit. We bring everything over here to C-Zone 47 to support the push for the double Dutch, and the sub, of course, trying to help out as well. Guys, there may be some parts of this where I haven't done what you would have done to counter this build. Maybe you're like, oh, well, this is an obvious solution. And if you think there's something there, then please put it in the comments and let me know. But I'm struggling to think about how the UK really addresses this problem of Germany swinging through with a huge attack on turn 2 while it has to deal with the Empire coming down to smack it. So you can see me trying to figure out, okay, what would be the best defense here? Look at how bare India is. Remember, if you do not leave India guarded, you are going to get clapped by the Japanese naval fleet, especially one transport that'll come down and hit India directly. So you can lose India on turn 2 if you don't put enough force there. This build I decided to try to defend on the UK's turn with 3 fighters. So that's a very common build for the UK on their turn 1. And I decided we'll put 2 here since I lost them in the fight, and we'll put 1 there. So you can see just how tenuous it is and how the dice roll in C-Zone 5 would really matters. It matters for this build. And even if Germany loses all of those transports, you still have this huge gamble of losing all of your planes, which makes Germany just turtle up and build more transports, because that's the one problem, is you'll have to keep building fighters as UK to hold back any naval power from Germany. And they can just devote 8 IPCs to build a transport every turn, just 8, and then they can fill it up with men, because those transports in C-Zone 5 especially facilitate the travel of troops up through Karelia. Usually you build armor because they just take the 2 steps, but if every turn you're ferrying a couple guys into Karelia, you're going to stack that and move through Archangel and have so much pressure on Russia. So the build of transports in 5 actually just makes sense anyways. So if UK commits to trying to take that out and loses a bunch of fighters, they have to decide between reinforcing. And this was kind of a mediocre result for them. You can see here 1 fighter, 2 infantry, and we're just going to try to say, okay, hold on, we've got good pressure from Germany. Let's see if we can keep it going. So you do your normal 61 C-zone down to transport. You do your bombardment. You bring the 2 fighters. Standard stuff, right? And then because we have abandoned... I guess the French Indochina one can come as well. So we can also do a lot of other work with Japan to really knock out the UK. So very desperate right now. The UK is extremely thin, and we can just take our other transport and either send troops inland and start attacking the United States and move toward Russia to squeeze, or as I decided here, you can just go right down to Burma. And that continues to apply pressure on India. Even if you don't grab India right away, you're dropping an armor and an infantry there, so you have a lot of pressure. So we do kind of standard attacks, I would say, with the other fighters, just moving troops in and cleaning out this mainland to prepare ourselves for real pressure once the UK has been dealt with. Taking out 47 with the rest of our fleet helps to consolidate all of our naval power and really our air power in the southern portions of our influence, so down around the India region. And this is valuable in this build because the pressure on India is going to be immense, and it will force the US to respond with speed rather than being able to take their time to address the Atlantic situation. So it's strange how applying this pressure from Germany on turn 1 ends up making the Calcutta Crush stronger for Japan. But it's partly because the UK is in that special place in between both theaters. And if you force IPCs out of the UK at the beginning of the game, and they have to split it to some degree. If you put all 3 fighters in India, the UK is in deep trouble with this build. If you stack infantry in England, you're in deep trouble because Germany can just say, okay, I will hold all of my transports here, clean out your naval, not let you get any more ships over here. I'll just keep my fighters on the west coast. And then I will just build infantry and shuttle them up to Karelia. And then when I'm ready, you'll never kill these transports because I just build a cruiser or 2 and keep them protected. How are you going to deal with that as the UK? You know, if you've spent your money stacking infantry on the capital, now India's in deep trouble. You have essentially troops that can't really do much for you in the short term because they're not mobile. I think this is a really powerful opening for Axis. It enables Calcutta to be weakened right away, which is the kind of time frame you need to avoid the United States getting involved. Now, I mean, you can probably quibble a little bit with some of the choices I'm making about disbursement, where fighters are going, where aircraft carriers are going, all of these kinds of details. But I think you get the main sentiment. This is round 1, guys. This is what round 1 looks like under these kinds of pressures. And you're like, well, hold on a second there, hero. Notice that you are talking about favorable rolls for Germany in this example. What happens if those 2 fighters and the bomber all hit and the cruisers are cleaned out right away? I mean, you could say that, but what we saw was a fairly average outcome where the cruisers are hitting, the fighters are hitting, there's a miss back and forth, and then one side wins and the other loses. Would you take that chance as the UK, sending your fighter and your bomber, because you need all three to really deal with the cruisers. If you send two, it's deadly. It's implausible. Not only that, the Egyptian fighter going to deal with the battleship because you have another threat from a transport. That's problematic. And the big problem here is usually on UK turn 1, what are we doing? We're using our air power to clean out subs. We're cleaning out Sea Zone 7. So you get this pressure point either way. If you go after Sea Zone 5 and Sea Zone 14 or whatever it is in the med, you suddenly leave open 7 and the subs that are remaining from that initial fight. Maybe there's 3 of them there. There'd be two there and then the other 2. So I guess there was 4 subs left over at the beginning of this game. How do you deal with that? That's really tough. So it enables the Calcutta Crush by forcing this division by the UK to try to survive. Now again, maybe that destroyer could have come in handy, but you'll notice that the UK did clean out the battleship and the transport in the med, so the position of the destroyer was irrelevant for what's going to happen to Germany. Meaning, even if you'd moved it through and blocked up the channel to come around on the Atlantic and do the bombardment, it actually doesn't matter. All you need is for 3 of your 4 transports to hit. So either, and maybe it's even less depending on the build. So if you do 1 less transport, I think you can maybe squeeze a destroyer out instead because there's a bit of leftover money. Maybe you do that and it's even more powerful. You don't get the bombardment, but you definitely dissuade the UK from attacking Sea Zone 5. So we see again some relatively standard things from Japan. And here's the trouble. If you're the US and you are beginning round 1, 8 of 9, you've lost India, Karelia obviously. How do you approach this game? Japan has already taken India. Germany is poised to take London. The US is basically out of the game already. So in this version, I tried to think, okay, if I'm the US, mustering an Atlantic fleet with transports is running headlong into German subs. And those cruisers, by the way, that might bombard. So, is it more likely that I get manpower to fight back and take back the UK? Sort of try to work with Russia a bit? Maybe start in Africa, something like that? Is it more likely that I can swing through and relieve the pressure on India or apply pressure to Japan that has made a really swift first move and spread themselves very thin? I thought probably the Pacific Theater is the more likely situation. And so this is the attempt to begin that process. We head into the center, Sea Zone 52. We're trying to rally troops from 56 and then create a big enough fleet to pressure multiple spots. But it's tough. It's tough to think through what force can you muster, because you have to make a decision on turn 1 from USA, and you have too many pressure points. So I do decide to try to get things going in Africa at a later date, but I just need to make sure that the subs and the cruisers are sorted out. Maybe it's a misplay. Maybe the U.S. should have just devoted itself to the Atlantic. But, if you do that, you just lose so much pressure, because Japan can build fighters and just wipe out the U.S. fleet, and it is completely free. If you've locked out the UK, if you take the capital or take India, which Japan has really done, you've wiped out essentially all of the UK's influence in this region, and there's nowhere to go. You're out of the game as the UK. It's even worse than Russia getting stormed. To knock out the UK means Japan has so much leverage. So I think the idea here was if Germany's going to do this, they're likely to be weak on the Western Front, and so by putting pressure on Japan. It's basically the US versus Japan and Russia versus Germany, and UK is just trying to support, instead of it being more of a mixed role of supporting Russia from the perspective of the UK, while you also chip in by holding on to India. A lot of this movement from the US is me just trying to figure out, in 3 turns from now, where are these guys going to go? And maybe, again, as I said, the Atlantic hesitancy of the cruiser and destroyer not trying to engage those subs is relevant, but it turns out in the end that it doesn't matter, because even if those destroyers and subs could get to the western shore of the UK, the trouble is coming from Sea Zone 5 to 6. You can see the map here. I'm trying to think, okay, Russia sees this. What are the options? And here's a really interesting insight. Look at where the Russian fighters are. So the Russian fighters are in Russia. And that's not an atypical place for them to finish, because you have their turn 1 capturing Ukraine. If you leave them in Ukraine, or you can't leave them in Ukraine, if you put them in Archangel, they're in danger, right? If you don't put them in Archangel, look at the access to Sea Zone 5. When you click on the fighter, I think I click on it here just to double check. Even Russia can't access Sea Zone 5. So this is a really important insight for this build. If there was any hope of cleaning out Sea Zone 5 before Germany gets a turn, Russia must land their troops in a different spot. Where can they land it? Archangel, I don't even think, makes it, because you have Karelia as 1 into Sea Zone 5. Oh, no, it does. Okay, good. So there's a note. Archangel is the only place to land those fighters. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that solves the problem. But you have to see that ahead of time, which is one of the hard things for Russia. How do you know that you're supposed to land your fighter planes in Archangel on turn 1, just in case the Germans decide on turn 1 to do the battle for Britain, or Sea Lion, or whatever we're calling this? You have to choose first. Look at how crazy that is. Just even doing your normal standard aggression from Russia, the delicacy of the strategy. Here I'm thinking, I need to relieve some pressure. Russia's got to do a little bit more heavy lifting than it's used to doing. So let's have a swat and see if our first volley of shots from these 5 guys can put a dent here. And you'll see it's not really that favorable. But the good news for Russia is they get to shove forward a little bit more and try to break this pressure. But it's too slow. I'm just going to zoom ahead a little bit here. We come out. Russia captures those territories. It's thinning itself out a little bit. That's the one problem with being aggressive with Russia, which is why this really works well for Germany. Even if you press forward, we simply cannot produce enough stuff to be aggressive. And you see I put 4 tanks there. And the reason for that is, as I just showed you, is we want to try to access India if needed to break it back. And in fact, that's what ends up happening, is in order to save the game, Russia's got to really come through and help the British allies. Now just look at how unfavored the UK is when we get going on this. I decide we're just going to get tanks, because after this push, we'll toss these in Germany and begin our Karelia march, cleaning out things in a turn or 2. We can wait, we can leave Poland alone and just stack 1 infantry, as long as we have that corridor open to us up into Karelia, and really as long as we have Sea Zone 5 available to us for transports. But this is the big push. Again, our fighters need to land as Germany at the end of our turn in France or in Norway, so that they can reach Britain. So we want to hit with 5 fighters, 1 bomber, the 3 transports with 3 armor and 3 guys on them, and then however many cruisers we have left. And that is just an overwhelming punch. We decide here to try to go after transports and destroyers with these subs, which again, maybe they would have already tried to clear out some of the subs. You can see where that is, but it's still not fast enough. And then we're just trying to think, what's the appropriate work that needs to be done if we don't have our fighters in place? And I'm trying to think through, can we afford to wait a turn? You see that armor or that tank that I'm in France? That was one of the ones that would come with us around the bend. So if we still had C-Zone 14, which is again a very implausible victory for the UK on that turn to kill off the battleship in 14. If we still have it, then we're using that tank to come around and also assault the UK. So this is kind of like an average starting point for Germany fighting against the UK here. It's not your best outcome. They've stacked it with a couple of fighters to try to remain viable, but it is really powerful, and that's partly because of how many fighters Germany begins turn 1 with. Even if you're aggressive with Russia, Germany still has 5 fighters that can, attack and make themselves known, especially if you play with that battleship properly in 14. It absorbs a hit and you allow 2 fighters to attack as well. This is strong, guys. I only have the 1 bombardment. This is only with 3 transports, and this is with the UK doing their triple planes, having invested 2 additional fighters. You can see how precarious this is. And how would you know as Russia that you need to address C-Zone 5? It doesn't exist until it's too late. So here goes the battle. I don't even think we lose any planes here. Now maybe this is a little bit above average. But yeah, we don't even lose any of our... Oh, we lost one of our planes actually from the anti-aircraft gun. So that's kind of interesting. So even down a plane, so I'm only at 4 planes before the battle even started. It's an average outcome in terms of what Germany's attacking the UK with on turn 2, but it's overwhelming. So this is how Germany 2 ends. And you can see here, I put them back in Norway because we want to start to hit the Russian theater on the Eastern Front here. We're just moving our armor, as I was saying before, back up through the channel. I think we probably got a little bit lucky in attacking that Central Europe part, but all we do is we just toss a guy or a tank to block Russia for a turn or 2 while the engine turns on. And you keep a sub or you keep a few fighters in Norway so that it can reach across to the water or into the Russian territory to support. We're just making sure that we've covered all the bases, and otherwise we just stack things up in Karelia. And now you'll see, imagine if you survive with even more, like if you had better odds, you got more bombardments, you had all 4 transports hitting the UK. The cruiser and those transports can now be redirected. And if you had a huge complement, like if I had 3 transports and I had maybe 3 or 4 guys, what can we do? We've got control of the Atlantic. We have fighter power. We can just go and assault the U.S. You can just turn and head for the U.S. if you wanted to. You're like, well, why didn't you? Could have done that. I just kind of wanted to see what is it like to then turn and try to take over Russia after this. And it turns out it's not too bad. But you'll see also, even if you choose not to go to the U.S., you can swing up into C-Zone 4 and attack Archangel from there. You can shuttle troops, you can just send them back into C-Zone 5 to do those fast shuttles, like I said, of the infantry from Germany as you're bringing them in. You can swing those transports and cruisers down into the Med to deal with India. So many really interesting options for Germany after you do the Battle for Britain or the Sea Lion attack. And here we've just kind of got a bit of desperation from the UK. So this is my take on how to try and salvage this. And I don't know if this is the best way to go about it, having done the double Dutch into this. Maybe the double Dutch was a bad idea, and as soon as we saw Germany, we could have done something completely different to try and circle back through into the mid. I don't know, to attack Italy. Maybe there's other strategies that would come of this, but just looking at the kind of standard ideas, and maybe that was bad of me in Japan. I left that open, but this is the fortuitous part to some degree for the UK of just snagging back a really tiny victory to make sure the victory cities aren't completely out of control, because at the beginning of the UK's turn 2, the Axis already has 9 out of 9. That's how powerful this is. You've got Karelia, you've hit the UK, and you've grabbed India. All of that at the end of turn 2 for Germany, which means that there's an enormous pressure, because all there is left is the UK and the US to try and grab a city before the game is over. So imagine, guys, if I hadn't moved all those guys from Japan into the inland, wouldn't the game would have been over, wouldn't it? Maybe there's a few reroutings that I could have done here instead of putting everything in the south. Like, you can see where the strategy would be even stronger if it was executed exactly right. And then, of course, all you have to do as Japan here is clean up. But the result of staving off that victory city for the UK is that we just lengthen the game a little bit longer. But just notice here that if I hadn't made that one tactical blunder as Japan to leave open a channel for... All I needed to do really was put like one destroyer there or something. If I put a destroyer in 48, you can't make it through, right? You just block up the sea and off you go. Even in this state, look, you have to... Look where the United States is. They still cannot land forces. The U.S. would have had to go up through Alaska and then tried to come down. And, you're done. Like Jiangsu, right? That's it. So the rest of this is really just mapping out for you the consequences. Say the battles have gone slightly differently and you were one city behind, or you need another turn from Germany to really crack the UK, or you needed, I don't know, there was something like that. You still have this overwhelming pressure. And I want to show you a little bit more of how the Allies respond to it, and then skip ahead. Again, I'm trying to just put as much pressure as possible on the on the German war machine. I'm like, man, maybe we should have gone earlier. But this is, you can expect this. Like, how would they know that they have to like jump in? These subs are in the way. This it's a mess, right? It's a mess for what decision the U.S. needs to take. But things are a little dire, so they have to start making long range plans like bombers just to get there, because these fights are huge. So we try to take another victory city here, because again, 9 of 9 at the beginning of the U.S.'s turn. If they do not take something, the game is over. So even if in U.S. 1 I hadn't moved troops and attacked at Iwo Jima, what do you do? Like, there's no access to these victory cities. It's such a strong grip. So they do get through, grab another victory city. We see Russia trying desperately to apply pressure, but realizing that this makes Russia so thin and there's no way to deal with it. Again, those tanks having come down through because of desperation, needing Russia to turn on the engine, and Russia doesn't have good transportation like in Sea Zone 5 for Germany. That access up the Baltic state, like, it's just crazy to get to Karelia quickly with armor. So this evens the game out a little bit, knocking out those two victory cities. So India is sort of liberated, although the UK is out of the game, which is a huge deal. and the U.S. has put a basic stopper in the Pacific, but they don't have the ability to reinforce. And like they're trying hard to get forces in there, but Japan has so many fighters in that region. The problem for Russia is that it's expensive to build tanks. You really want to be building artillery and infantry. This was desperation to get that tank in there to begin with, but even though it looks like Russia's crushing Germany and just running in there, you'll see on the German swingback how much is lost. You can see all the tags coming through. Germany just loads up and you have some transports coming, as I said, picking up troops in the Nordic regions and swinging them over to Archangel. The result of this is a huge takeback of territory and a crushing grip on Russia. And all you have to do is make sure you keep those subs around to repel anything coming across the Atlantic. If you see they're mounting an Atlantic fleet, you can just build bombers or fighters as Germany, and you don't have to build as much armor. But it takes a long time to get there. You can see the result is pretty overwhelming. Now Russia has to do more or less hold and hope that the U.S. is in time, but it's already kind of dire. Like you can stack troops on Russia and it'll take a little bit to get through it, which is what happens in this game. But the UK doesn't have any way to make money. Like there's no access to London. How do you get that back? It's barely into round 3 at the middle of round 2, before UK even gets a turn 2. They've been knocked out of the game, and that's hard to recover from. You can just slow roll across the east, just as if you suddenly crashed into Russia on turn 2 and had captured it right away. Like there's no. And the weird part for the UK is they're really split. So their naval force weakens substantially when they can't put fighters in India to defend, because those fighters are excellent for dealing with portions of the Japanese battle, like the southern portions in Borneo and all that. But if you get pincered, you're out of the game quick, and it's tough. So Germany is like dominating. Here we just have Japan let's take back India and just shuttle up and down the coast here. We don't really have to worry too much about going inland because Germany is doing fine. You can't even really do a kill Japan first strategy with this. It's just really difficult. Overall, things getting wiped out, taking back territory, trying to check to see is Japan accessible itself. Not really. You don't really have enough transports because you have to build both transports and planes to be valuable in the Pacific, and that takes too many turns. So even at round 3, things are basically exhausted. At the beginning of round 4, we have to stack as Russia, but all we do is just wait a turn as Germany. There's no pressure. Never going to be any more pressure in the Atlantic. It's been squeezed off. The subs have done their work. And you can't afford to build anything as the U.S. if you've made your commitment to the Pacific. So yeah, you could just build a transport in England and try to send it over to finish the game, but I wanted to do something a little more legitimate of seeing how you could fight these things. Here you have a bombardment technique here. We step over, grab a guy, bring it back, and so we get the bombardment from the battleship, and then we just clean everything up on the coastline as there's a desperate play to take back territory. And in the end, Russia falls. And this was actually a close battle, but you can see how it doesn't really matter that much because Germany can just swing in and take it the next turn. But there's a lot of forces here destroyed, and we're just building bombers at this point as Germany because, well, we can afford to. And that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much for letting me walk you through why I think this Britain attack first by Germany is kind of cool as a strategy. I'm probably mixed a few things up or didn't do things exactly right, but there are probably also some inefficiencies that could be even better for this build. So if you think of them, then let me know in the comments. Otherwise, catch you guys next time.